Hi, I'm Ken Harbaugh, former U.S. Navy pilot and host of Warriors in Their Own Words. The freedoms we enjoy as Americans have, since our nation's founding, been secured by the sacrifices of those who rose to defend them. Our mission here is straightforward: to preserve their stories, both to honor their service and to ensure that we learn from it. Every warrior story carries a lesson. It is our privilege to share those with you. Through archival interviews with veterans from World War II, up through modern-day conversations with warriors who fought in Iraq, Afghanistan, and on fields of conflict most Americans have never heard of, we present the unvarnished truth about what it takes to defend a nation. For me, this mission is personal. My grandfather flew bombers in World War II and was severely injured during a mission over the Pacific. He was shot through the leg by a 20-millimeter round, but still managed to bring his aircraft and crew home. My father flew Phantoms in Vietnam and was also hit by enemy fire, but managed to make it back to a base in friendly territory. I grew up on these stories. They helped shape the person I became. I've no doubt that my own military service as a combat reconnaissance pilot was inspired by their example. As citizens of a free nation, we owe everything to those who have gone before us. But to safeguard that freedom, we must work to understand their sacrifice, their stories, both to honor their memories and to strengthen our own resolve to protect what we have inherited. Our mission here is to present first-hand accounts from those who have defended this nation. This is the unvarnished, unsanitized truth of service and sacrifice from those who lived it. This is Warriors in Their Own Words.
The day I was shot down, I had just turned over a mountain peak. I was on my final heading and I had one more checkpoint right under my nose, and as soon as I got to that point, all of a sudden we got a air-to-air warning system. So I quickly jumped in the radio and I called the MiG cap flight, which are a flight of F-4s, which would be the second flight 8-10 miles back, and said, "Are you painting me?" I wanted to know if it was their air-to-air, it was a MiG. And they said, "Yeah, we're in trail with you about 10 miles, no sweat." Turned over that mountain peak, here's a valley down there. There were two MiGs down there orbiting, and it just so happened when we turned over, they rolled out of a turn, they looked up, and voila, there we sat. And everything was just perfect for them that day. And they both hosed off a sidewinder at I and my wingman. And so both my wingman and I, they went right up our tailpipes.
Hi, I'm Ken Harbaugh, host of Warriors in Their Own Words. Today we'll hear from Colonel Leo Thorsness. Thorsness served as a fighter pilot in Vietnam, flying for the legendary United States Air Force unit known as the Wild Weasels. The Wild Weasels were some of the most courageous pilots in the war. In a deadly game of cat and mouse, they flew fighters like the F-100, F-105, and F-4s deep into hostile airspace to coax the enemy into opening fire with their surface-to-air missiles.
The concept obviously this was the first war in which there were surface-to-air missiles. So we, the United States, our military industrial complex, came up with a concept of let's develop a missile that will home in on the radar, because the missiles that they fired us were radar controlled. Let's see if we can figure out and find a missile that will destroy that radar, and then let's put a system together and put an electronic warfare officer in the back seat of a two-place fighter and have that pilot do the maneuvering, and the warfare officer refine all this technical data and see if we can't find an aiming system where we can destroy those surface-to-air missiles either on the ground or figure out how to evade the SAMs once they're launched at this first in group, the Wild Weasels, and then we'll go destroy the radar after that in the launch vehicles. And so it was just another step in warfare where first-time weapon, now we got to come up with the defense to it. I had a friend in the assignment branch of the Air Force. Everybody's got a buddy, and I told him, I said, "Pete, the only job I don't want is a Wild Weasel job." And I was off getting a master's degree at University of Southern California in the bootstrap program. And most of the people that my qualifications had already gone. And I came back, and the day I walked in, the phone rang, and they said, "Tell Thorsness he's got a weasel assignment." And so it was not my first choice, but there's no question it's the most challenging job I've ever had. And I've talked about the exhilaration of flying a mission well and you won, and coming back across the fence, as we call the Macon River. But it was not my first choice of a job, but I had the experience and the skills. It was appropriate that I should be assigned to that job. Just like World War II or Korea, there were bridges, there were supply lines, railroad tracks, those kinds of hard targets. And that was the strike force, the flights of 4 airplanes coming in with their big bombs. We as Wild Weasels were tasked with the job of going in ahead of the people carrying the iron bombs, the strike flight, and eliminate the surface-to-air missile threat to them. And they had to deal with MiGs and flak, but we were supposed to eliminate that threat and let those people do their job of interdiction and destroying their fuel supplies, rail lines, and those things. We were always first in, and our job was to stay in there until the last flight was out to suppress the SAMs. So whereas the strike pilots coming in, they had a fixed target, they would come here, 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 drop their bombs, and they'd be time over target, TOT, maybe 2 minutes. We'd be trolling around in there for maybe 20 minutes. So it was just a statistical analysis that if someone's over the target for 2 minutes versus 20 minutes, the odds of being shot down are about 10 times greater if you're just hanging around in there. And that was our mission. I'd never flown with a crew member before, fighter pilot, single-place airplane, and all of a sudden I got this crew I got to coordinate with. But Harry Johnson turned out to be a frustrated fighter pilot, I think. He was a great EWO, and I taught him how to fly. There was a stick in the back seat of a 105. So we'd go up to the tankers, I'd carry pictures of the suspected SAM sites with me. I'd plug in, we'd get our fuel, and we'd wait for all the strike people. And I was studying those photographs, so right up to the last minute, and then I'd fly. Only one time out of 92 missions did he question my judgment, and we were out of the Delta by ourselves, trying to get a SAM site, and he said, "Leo, we're hanging it out kind of far." And because he was so hesitant to criticize my portion, my job, my portion of the crew, I paid a lot of attention to him. But Harry was just somehow we ended up being very well matched. We were both aggressive, and we both realized at some point you're better off to back out, come back tomorrow, rather than going to the point where you're just about certain to be shot down. But it'd be in the heat of things going on, and Harry had about 3 eyes. Harry twice saved our butt, because he saw MiGs coming in that I wasn't aware of there. And yet he's looking at the scope, he's listening to all that stuff, he's tuning these knobs, and I don't know how he maybe all navigators are cross-eyed, but Harry seemed to be able to look in 2 spots at 2 times, and he could listen to about 3 different radio signals and stay on top of it all. So without Harry, I would have been shot down. We would have been shot down long before we were. The best way to find a SAM site, after we'd been there a little while and they got used to what we were doing, you'd turn into them and get ready to launch a Shrike at them, our missile. They'd turn their sight off. And there were enough of them where they kind of kept you going. You were bouncing between them, and eventually they pulled you in or sucked you into the strike fights, and they had you. So the way we decided to do it was we would just figure out how to evade the missiles, let them shoot at us. And we'd troll in 15, 18,000 feet, somewhere in there. And we just kind of trolled around in there while these guys were coming in, hitting the targets and leaving. And eventually, they thought they had us in a position to launch a missile and get us, and they'd launch a missile. And we'd hear the launch, that we had the equipment to know that they'd launched. And so I'd immediately turn so that missile was somewhere on my one side or the other, 9 and roll the airplane inverted and just call the flight and say, "Take her down." And that became the common statement, "Take it down, take it down." And you'd point that airplane at the ground and plug it and burn it and go as fast as you could. And you'd pull out before you hit the ground with not a lot to spare. And you'd start pulling, and you'd pull it with a lot of G's, and you'd have all this airspeed so you could. Well, the missiles, they would swing down, and they'd have to arc down trying to get you. And they couldn't make the corner with you. And so the first one, you start pulling, and you wait the last minute or so, and they were traveling a mile every 2 seconds, 3,000 feet per second. And so you'd pull, and they couldn't quite make it. Pull the next one would be here, and they usually fired 3 at 6-second intervals. And so you knew kind of what, had they figured out and delayed that last one 18 seconds or 20 seconds, they'd gotten a lot of us. Because that last one, you're up here, run out of airspeed. We didn't have the airplanes of today. You could go fast, but they didn't have that much thrust. And you're up here, not very maneuverable. But we would just troll around back and forth. And we'd sucker them into firing at us, and then we got good enough to dodge them, and then we could go kill the SAM site, because when the SAMs fired, they kicked up all that dust on the ground. And so we'd go down with our CBUs or bombs or our guns, and we could destroy all that radar equipment. And if there are any SAM sites, or SAMs still stored there, they're thin-skinned, and the type of ordnance we had, we could destroy a lot of SAM sites that way. But it was a touch-and-go game to coax them into firing at you. Yes, there is a fighter pilot mentality, and I think it doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman. That's not the distinction. It's your what excites you, the type of challenges one likes. Somebody might like to get their PhD and go off and research medicine. I wanted to be a fighter pilot and live on the edge, kind of, and pull a lot of G's and go fast and be close to the ground and see the world zip by at supersonic speeds. I don't know if the word is thrill, but there's just why people become race drivers. I think most race drivers at Indy would probably make good fighter pilots. That type of mentality where they seek out those sorts of excitement, I think. And I've always said being a fighter pilot is like somebody giving you a brand new Porsche and a tank of gas and said, you know, go see how fast it'll go and go test it. It's just a wonderful job. Developing this tactic was a fun thing, because it was one of the things we kind of won. And what all it was is our Shrike missile could go about 7 miles. The surface-to-air missile shooting at us could go 17. They could kill us in that 10-mile range, and we couldn't touch them. And it was very frustrating. So one day we were coming back from a mission. We had a little extra fuel, and I said to Harry, "Let's see how high we can go, how fast we can go, and we get up at altitude, and then let's see if we can how far we can pull the nose up, and maybe we could lob these Shrikes somewhere in there." So we did that. We accelerated. We got up to about 35,000 feet, about 1.3 Mach, with all the paint and the pylons. But we get that. And so then I said, "Okay, here we go, Harry." And I said, if I had 2 Shrikes, I'd launch one at 40 and one at 50 degrees. You know, 45 is optimum. And I was able to get through 50 degrees before I kind of started stalling out and rolled it off the wing. So we knew how much we could do there. So I wrote a letter back to the Fighter Weapons School at Nellis Air Force Base, and I said, if I were to launch a Shrike, starting at 35,000 feet at Mach 1.3, and I'm down to whatever the airspeed was when I launched it, one at 40, one at 50, how far would it go? What would happen to it? And they said, well, it would go out there a long way, and then it wouldn't start homing and using up its homing until it got down below 18,000 feet. That was just part of the criteria of the missile. And you could probably hit something 35 miles away. And we smiled big, and we said, well, let's do it. So I wrote a letter to the Air Force down at Saigon, and I said, here's what we can do. Frag us, you know, orders to go out and do this. And I said, ideally, we'd have the strike people coming down with some Weasels from the north into Hanoi, and we'll come in from the southeast, and we'll back off 35,000 miles from all the SAMs in there, and I think we can do a lot of damage, and this is really going to get them. So they sent 4 of us up. One of them couldn't get rid of his drop tanks, so he aborted, but they had 3 of us, and we launched just before the 105s that flight of 20 was coming down, those 5 flights. And we pulled up, and I spread them 10 degrees, and we launched one at 40 and one at 50. And sure enough, we lobbed them right into the Hanoi area. And they had B-66s, ELINT airplane out there to figure out how effective we were. And they came back and they said, we killed 5 SAM sites, the radars, which are their control part, with 6 Shrikes. I mean, it was a phenomenal success. And they didn't know what hit them. And a little bit more to that then. That was viewed as being so good. Air Force down in Saigon said, do it again tomorrow. So we were taxiing out the next day, and they said, abort the mission, abort the mission. So we came back in and said, what went on? Well, I had a friend working in Saigon, and this is unofficial, but I know it happened. General Momar was down there, and I'm told he just about got fired because the Russians launched a protest to the ICC, the International Control Commission, like this wasn't fair. Because what happened is that in the Chinese embassy in Hanoi, they had a fan song, a radar sitting on top of their embassy to control some of the SAMs right there. And we wiped it out, and we killed 2 Russian technicians. And this is another rule of engagement that wasn't fair. So that was the last mission we ever flew like that into that area. But the system worked, and from then on, we used it. I, as a Weasel pilot, didn't consider it a suicide mission, but I knew the odds of my finishing 100 missions to go home were significantly less than a guy carrying a strike pilot where he was over the target area so much less. We used a lot of kind of tough slang in the military while you're flying pilots, and I don't use now, but an example of what you're saying, the respect or the reputation we had, my backseater, Harry Johnston, and I were on our R&R one day in the Philippines for a couple days, and we were getting back on a tanker to come back and go flying tomorrow, and my backseater, an EWO, was talking to a B-52 EWO, talking their same EWO language, I guess, and so my backseater said, well, I'm a Weasel. Leo's my pilot, and we're a Weasel crew. And the B-52 guys got kind of big, the other EWO, and he said, well, where's your extra bag? And Harry said, what do you mean? He said, where do you carry your balls? There was a very indirect way, or kind of a slang way of saying, I have very high regard for you guys that'll hang it out like that day after day, and knowing what the odds are. I suppose it helped to be one who appreciates living on the edge. I think if you'd been an old bomber pilot that got stuck into that job and you really hadn't been rolling on your back a lot as a young guy and had a lot of training where you pulled a lot of G's and you're kind of flying high-performance airplanes, you've been flying, tankers. I think that type of personality would not have done as good a job at weaseling, because while you're trolling around up there, the people flying with the iron bombs trying to hit that POL site, they know how far that POL site is from this bend in the river. It's 2 miles, and they're going to be 2 miles up. They go to 45 degrees, so they can plan out and they know exactly what their dive angle will be, and they can release them. But in trolling, all of a sudden you're up here and a SAM launches back here. First you got to evade that, and you're maybe at 3,000 feet, and you may end up at 20,000 feet. And now you got to figure out how to position that airplane with enough airspeed, dive angle, and altitude, and when to release the bomb to hit that site. There's nothing pre-planned. It's all, experience. So it is someone who thinks, I guess, in 3 dimensions that makes a good fighter pilot and could handle that Weasel job pretty well rather than having everything programmed out for them. The other side of it is we were viewed as just about loony, because when I got to Tak Lee, Thailand in 1966, I said, I'm here as a Wild Weasel, and I'm checking into the base. And they said, well, why should we assign you housing? We'll get you a spot up in Hanoi. You're not going to last. You'd be because the first 5 Weasel crews to get to Tak Lee were all shut down in 45 days. And I come prancing in thinking, I'm a pretty good guy now. I'm a good pilot, and I got all this equipment. We'll save you. And they, the squadron commander, the scheduling people, would give us the weakest pilot to fly with, because there was not much doubt in their mind they were going to lose us. So why risk a good pilot on my wing? Or I was there, and so I finally asked I said, give me some young lieutenants and put them on my wing. And on the very first mission we get up there, and even before we're out of the high threat area, I called number 4 and I said, take us home. Well, a wingman never gets to see anything but the wing hanging on, and all of a sudden he said, and they were given some leadership roles up there, and pretty soon I had a lot of lieutenants that wanted to fly with me. But it was a hairy job. We came in, they did not expect us to last. They didn't, 45 days and everything was wiped out, all 5 airplanes. And so they wondered if we were really worth losing more of their pilots as well as us. So we had to prove that the fact is we could save some of their airplanes rather than wasting some of their airplanes. Most fighter pilots, I think, like to have a challenge, and you're sort of out there on the edge. But there were times when, if someone didn't have high anxiety, you're abnormal. But if you go a little bit further, all of a sudden it's fear, and then fear starts controlling you. And there were times that you got very close to that edge of, I don't know if you should say lose it, but it was a very high anxiety level. And the joke was, you tell the first Weasel when he came in on a first mission, well, your mouth's going to get real dry, so chew gum. Well, of course your mouth does get dry and the gum starts sticking to your teeth. And then that's the big joke, when you get back that night. But the odds of coming out were not great. So I think the way you dealt with it is you just were so busy and there was so much activity going on that you didn't really have time to dwell on, I wonder if this is my last mission, I wonder if I'll get shot down. You're in there, you got all these different signals coming into you, you got a backseater, your EWO, and you're talking between yourself and you're listening to the different strike flights, you're listening to the electronic people warn about MiGs are taking off in a certain area. And I got to the point, instead of keeping a flight of 4, I'd split us up and we'd go put 2 airplanes on each side in kind of a pincher movement. And there was just more to do and more going on than what you could just about keep up with. And you were just so busy, time went by, and all of a sudden that last flight was in, and you were very aware who that last flight was going to be, and then you were out of there as fast as you could get out of there. Before going on a mission, we'd be in the PE room, personal equipment, putting in our parachute and our G-suits and so on, and our lockers were there, and it happened every so often. Somebody had asked me as a Weasel guy, because our odds are coming back were a little less, and he'd say, Leo, if you don't make it, can I have your locker? You kind of joke about shot down, death, prisoner, and in a way it's respect for the mission, and in a way it's just trying to add some levity, some lightness. It's a serious business, and whatever humor you can put into it is useful. I've never used drugs, but they talk about the high and you're addicted to that. Well, I was not addicted to the high that you got coming out, but I'll tell you, it was a very high feeling when you crossed the Mekong River, coming out of Laos, you're over Thailand, you're safe. You're over the good guy territory. And it really was an exhilaration to have, really you beat death that day. And many days you saw people get shot down. So it's there in your mind all the time, but it's usually, well, it won't happen to me, it's the other guy. And the next day you go home, and after you get back, you look at the schedule for tomorrow. If you're on it, you start getting your target out, and you start studying the photographs of it, and you prepare, and you go home, and you're dead tired, and you sleep, and the alarm goes off. It's right by your ear, and you get in your bicycle, you ride back down, and you're in another briefing, and you're ready to go, and then you get your hat out, you put another tick on there, and you're looking for 100 of them. And it's just, you went from one high to the other, so to speak. Maybe I'm overplaying that, but it was an exhilarating feel to have cheated death, so to speak. First, it was very tough to see a friend of yours, to see the airplane just blown apart, or maybe worse yet, to see him floating down in that parachute knowing he's going to be captured. That was, I guess the biggest fear of most of us was being captured, taken prisoner of war. If the airplane took a direct hit and it just blew apart, it was over like that. And that was easier to contemplate than spending years in a prison camp. The way you dealt with it, again, you just tried to do the best job you could. My goal was not to lose a wingman, and I made it through over 50 missions before a wingman was shot down. And that was a devastating night, to think that there were two guys sitting in a prison camp if they lived. And you didn't dwell on it. Again, maybe the fact that we were so busy and our mission was so challenging that we didn't have time to dwell on those kinds of things. You had another mission to fly tomorrow, and there were 20 guys. If there were 5 flights of 4, that's 1 guy per airplane. There's 20 guys depending on you. The day I was shot down, I was supposed to be on a bow and arrow tiger hunt. I had an R&R, and I was going to go down to Saigon on a bus and taxi, up the River Kwai on a boat, on an elephant inn, and close to Burma. And I had get-home-itis, so I canceled my R&Rs I'd saved, up 2 of them, and said I want to get my last 8 missions in real soon so I can be home by Mother's Day. And it took several Mother's Day, and I didn't even see a tiger over there. I had just turned over a mountain peak, and I was on my final heading, and I had one more checkpoint right under my nose, and as soon as I got to that point, I knew where that SAM site was up there was occupied. And I'd accelerated up to my launch speed, and I was just getting ready to, I was probably a minute before I launched a Shrike, which homes in on radar. And all of a sudden, we got a air-to-air warning system. And so I said to Harry, my backseater, I said, "You got air-to-air back there?" He's got more sophisticated tech. And he said, "Yeah." And so I quickly jumped on the radio, and I called the MiG cap flight, which are a flight of F-4s, which would be the second flight, 8-10 miles back, and said, "Are you painting me?" I want to know if it was their air-to-air, it was a MiG. And they said, "Yeah, we're in trail with you about 10 miles, no sweat." Well, they never answered my questions. They never answered my question directly. And, but I assumed it was the way they answered, "Yeah, no sweat, we're about 8 or 10 miles in trail with you." What happened is I turned over that mountain peak. Here's a valley down there, and there were 2 MiGs down there orbiting. And it just so happened, when we turned over, they rolled out of turn, they looked up, and voila, there we sat. And they couldn't keep up with us. Everything was just perfect for them that day. And they both hosed off a sidewinder at I and my wingman. And I did absolutely nothing as that sidewinder was about to me, because I knew it was the F-4's air-to-air, not a MiG air-to-air. And so we just blew out, both my wingman and I, they went right up our tailpipes. And so they 2 airplanes just like that, and three people. My backseater and the other one was a single airplane. So it was very frustrating in that I'd been over there in '92. I was on my 93rd mission, and I'd evaded so much stuff, and I'd shot down a couple of MiGs, and I'd been, had a lot of experience, and I did absolutely nothing. I just sat there because of the intelligence I just received. I felt safe, and I wasn't, obviously. Harry and I had briefed many times if we ever took a direct hit, that we would eject no matter what our airspeed, because we'd seen airplanes hit and the guy, we thought, tried to stay with it till he slowed down, get out safer, and the airplane came apart or he never made it out. So we'd briefed many times, and I said, Harry, if I ever say the word go, and you'll know the context, don't question it, you just pull that ejection trigger and I'll be right behind you, because the back seat's supposed to go before the front seat, because you'll burn him with your rocket if he's got his canopy on. And when we took this severe hit, it felt like somebody hit the airplane with a big sledgehammer. The controls were instantly gone. The cockpit was full of smoke. I put my visor right against the side of the cockpit. I couldn't see out. It was so thick, and I was starting to feel smoke in my lungs. And the airplane was unwinding and starting to do gyrations. And that took a lot longer to say than what the decision to say, go. Harry said, shit, and went. And I heard the rush of sound, and then I went right after him, and we were probably, and we were doing 600 knots. 675 miles an hour, and about 525 is the fastest you're supposed to be able to escape without energy. And both of us had some minor injuries, Harry's, our backs, but my legs went straight sideways at my knees when I hit the airstream. And so both of the inside knees were torn up badly, but the system worked. We got out of the airplane. And we were floating down, and there were two thoughts that went through my mind, and I don't know why, and I hadn't thought about that I'd think about it. But one was, it went over and over and over, Leo, you're going to make it. Leo, you're going to make it. And it was a very comforting thought. The second one was, how will my family take it? I had a wife and a daughter, and I was close to getting home, and we knew about when I'd finished my 100 missions. But yeah, I looked down, and there was a pretty good wind, so it was drifting across the jungle, but maybe 2,000, 3,000 feet below me were the trees, and there was an opening. I saw muzzle flashes, a rifle flash, shooting at me in my parachute, and it's hard to hide in a parachute. But they were lousy shots, and I was moving across. But that apprehension, some people are killed when they're picked up. Some people were skinned alive, I know. That's the fear of becoming a POW. And that was not a good day. I couldn't walk when I got on the ground. My parachute hung up a tree. I finally had a rope with me, a lanyard, and I got down. But I couldn't walk because my knees were out. So I was crawling up this mountain, and I knew there were rescue airplanes en route. And about 10 minutes after I was captured, they were overhead, but that was too late. But there were probably 20 young guys, all young males. A couple of them had real rifles and old rifles. Some of them had wooden training rifles, I assume. They all had machetes. And they caught up with me as I was crawling uphill up the mountain. And first thing they did was cut my clothes off, and they'd never seen a zipper. These were in the mountains, the tribes. And even my boots had zippers on, but they were very good using machetes. And they didn't care if they nicked you a little, so I ended up with, pretty well bloodied up with a set of underwear. And then they kind of sat me down, and I'll never forget this feeling. They put kind of like a pillowcase, a bag over my head. And just as that was happening, I saw the young fellow in front of me. He had a machete, and he was pulling it back, and it was pointed right towards my stomach. There was no question in my mind. That was the end of it. And the thought that went through my mind is, I wonder if my family will ever find out how I died. But he didn't, and they carried me in a net because I couldn't walk, and we made it down to the flatlands. Then we spent a night and a day there because they didn't travel with trucks at night or during the daytime, because my buddies were bombing them, and Harry and I were both interrogated literally in a pig pen that first day. And I got by with name, rank, surname, date of birth, like you're supposed to. I thought I can handle it. It was kind of tough when you're knocked around, the pig pen and the manure and so on, but that was just the beginning. It wasn't 6 years of hell, well, being without your freedom is, but 3 years for my time. I was there about 6 years. 3 years were brutal. Torture was normal. Beatings, torture, shoulders being pulled out of sockets because they've got your shoulder, your elbows strapped behind you with wire, and they're with their foot up there pulling it, and they'll pop a shoulder or hanging you upside down by shackles on your feet and a bar through it and hanging you in room 18 or one of those cells. There's a hook up in the ceiling and beating you till you passed out. It was very difficult. The first 3 years, I am not a preacher, but I would gladly say that I wasn't strong enough to have made it on my own. I had some help, some outside faith. I'm a Christian, was before, became more so there. My backseater, Harry Johnson, I don't think he was sure if he's an atheist or an agnostic, but there's very few of those, very few atheists in prison camps. And he became a pretty devout Christian, but most of us would admit that we needed some additional help and some strength. And that, there were times when you'd pray you could pass out, or try to get through the next. It wasn't always the next day. Sometimes it was the next hour, next minute, next few seconds, and it was pretty brutal for some time. Ho Chi Minh died. The wives, the families started the campaign. Letter, the bracelets. Hanoi released my father, bumper stickers and billboards, and they finally realized that we were expected to come home alive. That was after about 3 years, and treatment got quite a bit better. We lived in big cells. We got to talk out loud, and then it was a matter of waiting it out rather than wondering if you'd survive because of brutality and being shot or something. The day we were released, we all got on a bus. I had been sick. I was living by myself. I hoped they wouldn't forget me. I had kind of a malaria stuff, and I'd had hepatitis while I was there. And they didn't forget me, and I got my shoes and pants and jacket like everybody else. Got on the airplane and walked out to Hanoi. They gave us a warm beer. The Vietnamese did, as we got into kind of a little terminal. And then we went out to the tarmac, and the C-141 was staying out there, a beautiful airplane. And there was a colonel, was a ranking American person, and an equal rank Vietnamese, and they called off our name. We stood in formation and we marched forward. We saluted the Air Force colonel, and they turned control of us from the Vietnamese to them. They hustled us out to the airplane, and we all had escorts. We were met in the back of the airplane. The big ramp was down by the best looking nurses in the whole world, and they all gave us a kiss and put us on the airplane, and we took off for Clark. And there was no emotion when we left the prison. There was no outward emotion. As we drove through Hanoi and looked to where the bombing craters were and so on, or on the ramp. There was no emotion until the airplane broke ground. And we'd been expecting to go home for so long, and little things would come along. We'd say, I wonder if this is going to be, that we no longer allowed ourselves to become emotional. We kept a very level keel for several years at the end. And, but when that airplane broke ground, we truly believed we were on our way to freedom. And it just exploded, and there was hugging and just every type of emotion that mostly is physical. And I was still somewhat sick, and then we stopped at Clark Air Base, had some interrogation, put us back in the airplane. I was sicker by then, and I was the only POW taken off the airplane in Hawaii coming home, because I asked them to put some ice on me. I was taking my own temperature in a litter. It was 102, I had 103, 104, 105, and they packed me down. And I said, I'm not going to expire now. I've gone through too much. So I got to Clark. They flew me up to General Tripler Hospital, and I couldn't believe it. I was solitary in a big wing up there. I was in solitary confinement because they had a wing preserved for the POWs, or reserved, and I was the only one. But I got to finish this story because it just stirs a soft spot in my heart. Called my wife, and they got my temperature down some, and they said, if you can walk, you can get on this airplane. We'll get you back to St. Louis where your wife's waiting for you now. So we got on this 141, and I was the only prisoner. And we got on there, and I had my own flight nurse surgeon, I had my own nurse, medical team, and a crew. But as we approached the West Coast, San Francisco, we flew over San Francisco, they said, you want to make a position report to flight control up there? And our homecoming call sign is 7. So I said, you bet. And so I said, homecoming, San Francisco Center, this is homecoming 7. We're 200 miles out, directions please, or instructions please. And they played Don't Fence Me In over the radio. It was midnight or so, it was dark, but you could see the horizon lights up there. And then they said, welcome home, welcome home. And the thought that went through my mind, I'm a Minnesota farm kid. And here I was, I had my own airliner, and they said, you have presidential clearance for your present position, direct St. Louis. And I thought, being home is going to be okay. It's going to meet all those expectations that we've been dreaming about and so on. But I was impressed. I received the Medal of Honor because I was trying to rescue my downed wingman, direct the rescue operation. Most Medals of Honor are given You know, not because you kill a lot of people, but because you're saving your buddy or something. And in my case, my wingman had been shot down, and there were two of them in the airplane. A MiG started attacking the two guys floating down the airplane. So I attacked that MiG and ended up shooting that MiG down. And then about that time, some MiGs were on our tail, and we escaped out of there, low level, supersonic on the deck, through valleys, and came back around one more time and was trying to make radio contact with these my wingmen on the radio, their little handheld radio, and started to make that contact, and we were out of fuel. So we went to some distance out, found an air refueling tanker. While we're on the tanker, I'm saying, I need some help, we're going back in. I need a flight with me. Well, there's always mix-ups. So it turned out there was nobody available to go with me, and that's how things happen sometimes. So Harry and I, we had a little bit of ammo left, and that's about all. We went back in by ourselves, and just about the time we got over where my wingmen were, we, by ourselves, surrounded 5 MiGs. And they were all in the circle up there, and I just happened to fly in the middle of it and hosed away with the last fuel I had on another one up there, and pieces started coming off, but by that time there were more of them on us, and we, one more time, back through the valleys, and finally got away from them, and finally another flight came in, and so they took over the rescue operation. I was close to a tanker, and all of a sudden over the radio, and you never use first names over the radio, I heard this voice that said, Leo. I said, you know, Tomahawk 3 here, yes, or whatever it is, lead. He said, I got 600 pounds, I don't know where I am, and I'm about to eject. So I called my tanker, I put him on the same channel, and I said, tanker, you come further north and home in on this guy, and Harry and I will try to make it to Thailand on the fuel we got. And this guy, I know his name, and he hooked up with 0 indication remaining, coasting downhill. He hooked in the tanker, and they saved that one. And then we climbed to 35,000 feet, and an Air 105 will glide 2 miles per 1,000. So when we were 70 miles out, indicating about 0, pulled it back to idle and started gliding, and we ran out of fuel just after we touched down in Thailand. So it was just a mission that lasted a long time, a couple of refuelings in there, and we probably should not have survived it, but you don't think, you know, will I be rewarded with this? Some people say you should have been criticized for it because the odds of being shot down are great. It was just my job. I mean, he was my wingman. There was no question that my job was to go in there and direct that operation. And if things fell apart and I was the only one there, then I was the only one there. But there were a couple Sandy airplanes coming up, you know, rescue airplanes coming up there. And while we were there, as I was coming back in after refueling, Sandy 2 call said, Sandy 1's going in, Sandy 1's going in. The MiGs were on these little propeller recips airplane. And he kind of said, what should I do in essence? And I said, keep turning your airplane as hard as you can turn it. They can't stay with you, and keep talking and I'll home in on you. And so he kept talking, and I just used my automatic direction find, homed in on him and went right through those MiGs, and they did what I hoped they would. They followed me, and he got away. But going through the mind is, you have a job to do, and that's all there's to it. There's no question of should I or shouldn't I when somebody's hurting. He's your wingman. I was proud, and I was humble, and I had read Medals of Honor citations before I went to the White House, so I knew what kind of men I was going to join in this society. But I found out with the TAP code in prison that I'd been submitted for the Medal of Honor. And I was shot down 11 days after this mission I flew that I later got the Medal of Honor. 11 days later I was shot down. But someone came into the squadron about that time, and he was tasked to write this Medal of Honor citation. Then he was shot down. So he was aware of this, and so with the TAP code, about maybe a year or a year and a half after I was there, I found out that I'd been submitted for the Medal of Honor. And I came home after 6 years of being there. Nothing was in my records about that, and it was blank for that day. And I looked at my backseater's records, and he'd received the Air Force Cross, which is the next medal. And he kind of gave me a hard time about that, but he said, you know, there's something going on here. So at any rate, I was contacted by the Air Force and said that I'd been submitted for a Medal of Honor, but it's going back through channels. And I said, why is that? And they didn't really answer it, but the reason it was is we had 7 people as prisoners of war who collaborated. And that's a difficult thing to say because Americans should, but we had 7 Americans who collaborated. And the Air Force, even though the Medal of Honor wasn't for prison time, they didn't want to be embarrassed by awarding someone. So it went back through the system, and it took another 9 months or so. So I think I'm the only Medal of Honor recipient that has been approved by 2 administrations, 2 presidents, and all that. My wife, who's Swedish, thinks it's because I'm Norwegian. She couldn't, and all that. There was no question in my mind what communism was. I'd been a fighter pilot during the Cold War. I sat in Germany with nuclear weapons strapped to the bottom with targets in Russia, and this was just sort of an extension of that. And now the communists were trying to go down and capture Thailand, which is the breadbasket for them. And our government had made the decision for us to be involved. And even then, we knew it was a little shaky. The Gulf of Tonkin incident, was that a good enough reason to get involved? But Kennedy had put arms people in, and Johnson built it up, and there we were. So I didn't really question that I was following legal orders or lawful orders. I was performing the job I'd been asked to do, and was somewhat proud to do it, even though I was totally disgusted with the fact we fought with one arm tied behind our back. And a couple examples: Ho Chi Minh had a summer palace. We couldn't, in the mountains, we knew we couldn't fly within 10 miles of it. If a MiG was attacking us and we got into a battle and the MiG was within 25 miles of the Chinese border, we had to back off because of fear of inciting the Chinese to be more involved. The most frustrating thing was day after day, northwest of Hanoi, there was a base called Phu Quien, one of the major MiG bases. We could see them parked down there in the revetments, we could see them taxiing out, we could see them taking off, and we couldn't touch them until they were airborne. And that was just ludicrous. It took a week of briefing for me to find out what we couldn't do over North Vietnam in combat, in fighting combat. That was, it was a dumb, poorly run war. My mission I was ordered to go in and do it, and I don't think I questioned it for several things. One is I'd been trained to do it. I was a professional fighter pilot, and I was at the top of my career. My flying was good. I was recognized as such, and they picked those people to be Weasels. And I suppose I had a certain amount of pride in that. Also, when we went to Vietnam, the war wasn't really, the anti-war thing hadn't started out yet. I went over there in '66. And I think another thing is I would have been embarrassed not to. Everybody was doing their job to the best they could, with rare exceptions. And had I all of a sudden one day said, I don't think I believe in this cause, I guess I won't go. I think just pride would have prevented me from saying that. So maybe it was foolish pride, maybe it was youth pride, even though I was old at the time. But young people don't seem to question their government. I grew up in a patriotic home, and I was fighting I was red, white, and blue when I went over there. And I would just add, surprisingly maybe to most people, I came home, I think I was more red, white, and blue. And that was simply because I'd had a chance to look at communism from within the very bowels of the system for 6 years. And there's a lot of things wrong with our country, but it's all relative. When you compare it to that dictatorial, no freedom, autocratic system, I was so proud to be an American. And we came home, I'm rambling, but we came home to a country that was much less red, white, and blue. We came home to a country that had lost confidence in our institutions, just about our family, our religion, our government, our military, our school system even. And it was a difficult adjustment. We came home so proud to be Americans, to an America that was so much, what's the opposite of less proud, or so against our country, so much less proud than when we left. So it was quite an adjustment for us when we came home. Was it worth it? At the time, it was. In hindsight, what I know now, it wasn't. But the bigger answer is the war, I don't think was worth it. We probably should not have fought that war. I don't think we should have been there. We didn't have a good reason for being there, and then we made all those mistakes during the war and so on. So in hindsight, which is always perfect, no, it was not worth it. At the time we were doing it, we felt we were doing the right thing. We were doing our job. There was a threat out there. They were shooting down airplanes out of the sky with Swift-Star missiles. We came up with a system to counter that. We went in and we destroyed a lot of SAM sites. And we made the job of our strike pilots a lot safer. From that respect, without question, it was worth it.
That was Medal of Honor recipient Colonel Leo Thorsness. Warriors in Their Own Words is our attempt to present an unvarnished, unsanitized truth of what we have asked of those who defend this nation. Thank you for watching, and by doing so, honoring those who've served. This program was produced by Evergreen Podcasts and Documentary.tv. I'm your host, Ken Harbaugh. If you've enjoyed this episode, please comment, share, and subscribe below.